Home used to feel safe, until a stranger's shoes appeared by the door. One weekend guest turned into a permanent presence, and suddenly, the woman who once promised, just us against the world, was handing me an ultimatum. Accept him as my future stepfather, or pack my things and go. What began as a countdown to college became a desperate fight to hold on to the only family I had left, before she erased me completely. I never realized how much I valued the sanctuary of my childhood home until I felt it slipping away. With college looming just months ahead, I'd been savoring every moment of familiarity, every trace of what once was. Then he appeared at our doorstep, a stranger with familiar permissions, who looked at my mother in ways that made her forget I existed. And suddenly, the countdown to my departure became less about nostalgia and more about survival. That Friday started like any other end of senior year day. Prom preparations, last-minute texts with friends about our after-party plans, the usual chaotic energy of endings and beginnings all swirling together. I was getting ready to leave when my mom casually mentioned her boyfriend would be staying over the weekend. Not asking. Telling. Calling. You'll finally get to meet him, she said, her voice carrying that artificial brightness that had become her trademark since the divorce. Today? He's coming today? I asked, mascara wand frozen mid-air. He'll be here before you get home from prom, she replied, not looking up from her phone. Don't worry, you'll love him. Love him? I hadn't even met him. Didn't even know his name until she mentioned it in passing. And now he would be sleeping in our house, our safe place, while I was out celebrating one of the milestone moments of my young life. The intrusion felt deliberate, the timing perfect to minimize my objections. I spent extra time getting ready, drew out every moment at prom, and lingered at the after-party until even the most dedicated night owls were heading home. My friends noticed. Everything okay? My best friend asked as we huddled near the punch bowl. Yeah, I lied. Just trying to make the most of it. What I couldn't say was that I was stalling, avoiding the inevitable return to a home that would feel different now. Changed. Like someone had rearranged all the furniture while keeping it in exactly the same place. When I finally did return, the house was dark, except for the blue glow of the television in my mom's room. A pair of unfamiliar shoes sat by the door, large, masculine, taking up space. I tiptoed to my room, changed as quietly as possible, and fell into a restless sleep filled with dreams of locked doors and missing keys. Morning came, and with it the hope that maybe he'd already left. But the smell of unfamiliar cologne lingered in our bathroom. A different brand of coffee brewed in the kitchen. And there he was, sitting at our table, scrolling through his phone like he belonged there. There she is, my mom said, her voice still carrying that brittle cheerfulness. This is my daughter. He looked up, offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, Nice to finally meet you. Finally. As if I had been the one avoiding this introduction. As if I had been the obstacle to their happiness. I mumbled something resembling a greeting, and retreated to my room, where I stayed until I heard the front door close hours later. Only then did I emerge, breathing in the temporary relief of their absence. It started with small things, the reorganization of the refrigerator to accommodate his preferred beers, the rearrangement of the living room furniture to better suit his viewing angle for sports. Then came the subtle shift in my mother's attention. Once, she would have asked about prom, wanted to see pictures, demanded details about dresses and dates and dancing. Now, she barely acknowledged I'd been gone at all. When they left for their date, I saw my chance. Mother's Day was approaching, and despite everything, I wanted to remind her that I was still here. Still, her daughter. Still, the one who remembered her favorite chocolates, dark with sea salt, her preferred flowers, peonies, and her love of those ridiculous helium balloons that sang when you pressed a button. I spent my last bit of grocery money on these treasures, carefully arranging them in the living room, imagining her face when she saw them. The effort exhausted me in a way that felt heavier than physical fatigue. I retreated to my room for a nap, falling into a deep sleep that was interrupted by the worst migraine I'd had in months. The pain throbbed behind my eyes as I heard them return, his laughter too loud in our usually quiet space. I burrowed deeper under my covers, praying the pain would subside, wishing I could disappear until Monday when, surely, he would be gone. Hours passed before the need for medication forced me to emerge. I shuffled to the kitchen, squinting against the harsh overhead light, only to find them cuddled on the couch. No mention of the Mother's Day display. No acknowledgement of my effort or existence. When is he leaving? I asked my mother directly, pain making me braver than usual. She looked at me as if I'd asked her to explain quantum physics. "He's staying through the weekend," she said coolly. "We've made plans." The word "we" hit me like a physical blow. Once, not so long ago, we had meant her and me. Now I was the outsider, the unwelcome third wheel in what had once been my only safe place. But Beamsy, I do this. I started, then stopped as tears formed. I hated crying in front of others, hated the vulnerability of it. But the combination of pain, exhaustion, and the slow realization that I was being erased from my own life overwhelmed me. "I bought you Mother's Day gifts," I managed, gesturing weakly toward the living room. "I wanted us to have time together before I leave for college." "You're being selfish," my mother said, her voice hardening. "And inconsiderate. You know how important this relationship is to me." Important enough to replace me, I thought but didn't say. Important enough to forget that we had once been a unit, a team, survivors of my father's emotional distance and eventual departure. I didn't respond. Couldn't. Instead, I grabbed my keys and my dog's leash. Poor, neglected thing that he'd become since my mother's dating life took precedence, and fled the house. The night air hit my face like a gentle slap, clearing my head but not my heart. My dog trotted happily beside me, oblivious to the human drama unfolding, just grateful for the attention. I drove aimlessly for a while, finally parking at the overlook where my mother used to take me to watch meteor showers when I was young. "Just you and me against the world, kiddo," she would say then, wrapping her arm around my shoulder as we counted shooting stars. Now, the memory felt like a lie, a sweet fiction told to a child too young to understand the impermanence of parental promises. My phone buzzed occasionally with texts from friends, asking about post-prom plans for the weekend. I ignored them all. How could I explain that I was essentially homeless while still having a house? That I'd been replaced so completely that even my dog had become inconvenience? It wasn't until I decided to return home. No, not home anymore, just the house. That I called my mother. The conversation was brief and devastating. "Are you coming back?" she asked, her tone suggesting she didn't particularly care either way. "Is he still there?" I countered. "Of course he is," she snapped. "And you need to stop this childish behavior. He's going to be your stepfather soon, and you're being incredibly selfish." Stepfather? The word sent a chill through me. This man I had met less than 24 hours ago, whose name I barely knew, was now being positioned as a permanent fixture in my life. "I don't even know him," I whispered. "That's your choice," she replied coldly. "But let me be clear. If you can't accommodate him in your life, if you can't warm up to him, then you can find somewhere else to live for the summer before college. And don't expect me to keep in touch once you're gone." The ultimatum hung between us like a physical thing, heavy with implication. Love him or lose me. Accept him or be cast out. A choice that was no choice at all. I ended the call without responding, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. My dog whined softly, sensing my distress, and I buried my face in his fur, allowing myself to cry for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Chapter 4. Patterns and Perspectives. The worst part was the familiarity of it all. This wasn't the first time my mother had prioritized a romantic interest over our relationship. It wasn't even the second or third. It was a pattern so well established that I should have seen it coming from the moment she mentioned his name. There was the businessman who thought my desire to attend medical school was cute, but unrealistic. He would corner me in the kitchen to explain, in excruciating detail, why women made better nurses than doctors. My mother would laugh along, shooting me warning glances if I dared to contradict him. Then came the fitness instructor, who implemented a household health initiative that looked suspiciously like a diet aimed at my teenage body. When I developed an eating disorder 6 months later, my mother blamed school, stress. And who could forget the aspiring musician who converted our garage, where I had once built science fair projects and painted, into his personal studio. The space had been promised to me for my senior year art project, but his need was deemed more pressing. Each time, the pattern was the same. Infatuation, incorporation, and eventual disintegration when the relationship inevitably failed. But each time, my mother insisted this one was different. This one would last. This one was worth the sacrifice. And each time I was the one expected to adapt, to accommodate, to make room in my life and heart for these temporary fixtures. Never once was I asked if I was comfortable, if I felt safe, if I needed time to adjust. The expectation was immediate acceptance, immediate family, immediate love. "You're being dramatic," my mother would say when I expressed concern. "You're just jealous because you don't want to share me." Maybe there was some truth to that. The divorce had been hard, watching my father walk away, realizing that his new family took precedence over his existing one. But what my mother never understood was that my resistance wasn't about possession. It was about protection. I had seen how these men changed her, how she molded herself to their expectations, how she became less herself and more a reflection of their desires. I had spent my high school years becoming increasingly self-sufficient, learning to cook my own meals, manage my own schedule, soothe my own hurts. Not because I wanted independence, but because it had become necessary for survival. By the time college applications rolled around, I had essentially been parenting myself for years. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now facing homelessness because I couldn't play along with my mother's latest romantic fantasy. That the woman who had once promised to be my safe harbor now viewed me as expendable, replaceable, an inconvenience to her happiness. That night, I slept in my car with my dog curled beside me, the seats reclined as far as they would go, which wasn't far enough for comfort. The overlook closed at midnight, so I relocated to the 24-hour supermarket parking lot, where at least the security lights provided some sense of safety. Morning found me stiff, tired, and no closer to a resolution. My phone showed 3 missed calls from my mother, but no voicemails. She was probably just checking to see if she needed to file a missing person report, I thought bitterly. The administrative inconvenience of a runaway daughter would certainly interfere with her romantic weekend. I took my dog to the park, let him run and play while I sat on a bench and contemplated my options. I could go to my father, but our relationship had been strained since the divorce. He had his new wife, his new stepchildren, his new life that seemed to have limited space for me. He paid for what was legally required, a portion of my college tuition, but emotional support had become as rare as his phone calls. I could reach out to friends, but explaining the situation would require vulnerability I wasn't sure I possessed. How do you tell someone that your own mother has effectively chosen a stranger over you? That you've been given an ultimatum to either accept this man you don't know into your life, or lose your only remaining parent? The reality of my situation crashed over me in waves. I was 18, technically an adult, but still so dependent in so many ways. I had savings, but not enough to live on. I had plans for the future, but those plans had included a home base, a place to return to during breaks and holidays. Now it seemed I had none of that. Just a car, a dog, and a mother who had made it clear that her romantic fulfillment took precedence over my well-being. I sat in that park until the afternoon sun began to dip, my mind cycling through the same hopeless thoughts. My dog eventually settled at my feet, tired from play and sensing my mood. I stroked his head absently, grateful for his simple, unconditional affection. "At least you still love me," I whispered to him. That's when I broke. Not in the dramatic, sobbing way I had earlier, but in a deeper, more fundamental way. Something inside me cracked open, allowing a rush of emotions I had been suppressing for years to surface. Anger, betrayal, grief, and most devastatingly, a profound sense of worthlessness. If my own mother could discard me so easily, what did that say about my value? If the person who was supposed to love me most in the world could repeatedly choose temporary relationships over our permanent one, what did that indicate about my lovability? These weren't new questions, but they hit differently now, with the concrete reality of my situation forcing me to confront them. I had been told repeatedly that I was being selfish for wanting baseline consideration, inconsiderate for having boundaries, dramatic for expressing pain. I had internalized these accusations to the point where I questioned my own perceptions, my own needs, my own right to exist in spaces meant to be safe. The next morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't continue to beg for scraps of attention from someone who had made it clear I was an afterthought. I wouldn't live in fear of eviction, of abandonment, of being told I was too difficult, too sensitive, too much. I drove to a coffee shop, ordered the largest size available, and began to make plans. Real plans, contingency plans, survival plans. I researched summer housing options near my future college. I looked into part-time jobs that could supplement my savings. I contacted the financial aid office to inquire about emergency assistance programs. And then, because I had exhausted all practical avenues and had nowhere else to turn, I called my father. Our conversation was awkward at first, filled with the strained politeness that had characterized our relationship since he left. But something in my voice must have conveyed the gravity of the situation, because halfway through my carefully rehearsed explanation, his tone changed. "Wait," he interrupted. "She's threatening to kick you out because you're uncomfortable with a man you've just met staying in your home?" "Yes," I admitted, relieved to have someone understand without requiring extensive justification. "And it's not the first time she's done this." There was a long pause, followed by a heavy sigh. "No," he said finally. "I don't suppose it is. We talked for over an hour, the longest conversation we'd had in years." He didn't offer solutions or platitudes, just listened as I poured out the accumulated pain and frustration of the past 2 years. When I finished, exhausted but somehow lighter, he said something that shifted my perspective entirely. "You know," he began cautiously, "your mother has always been terrified of being alone. It's why she moved from relationship to relationship so quickly after we separated. It's why she's willing to overlook red flags and make compromises that she shouldn't." "That doesn't excuse how she's treating me," I protested. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. Nothing excuses that. But it might help to understand that none of it, is about you. It's not a reflection of your worth or how much she loves you. It's about her fear, her insecurity, her inability to be comfortable with herself." I considered this, turning it over in my mind. It didn't lessen the hurt, but it provided a framework, a context that made her behavior slightly more comprehensible, if no more acceptable. "I can't go back there," I said finally. "Not if he's still there, and not with things as they are." "You shouldn't have to," my father replied, surprising me with his vehemence. "You deserve better than ultimatums and emotional manipulation. Stay with a friend tonight. I'll make some calls, see what I can arrange for the summer." When we ended the call, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not the naive hope that my mother would suddenly change, but the grounded hope that comes from knowing you're not entirely alone, that there are options, paths forward, that don't require you to sacrifice your dignity or sense of safety. I spent that night with my best friend, whose parents welcomed me with an absence of questions that suggested they'd witnessed enough of my mother's behavior over the years to fill in the blanks themselves. My dog was accommodated without hesitation, given a makeshift bed and treats that made him look at me, as if to ask why we hadn't been staying there all along. The next day, Mother's Day, dawned bright and clear. I checked my phone to find a single text from my mother. "Where are you? We need to talk." No concern for my well-being. No acknowledgement of the day. Just a demand for my presence, likely to resume the conversation where we left off, with me being labeled selfish and inconsiderate for having boundaries. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took a long shower, borrowed clean clothes from my friend, and tried to organize my thoughts. What did I want from this conversation? What outcome would allow me to move forward with my dignity intact? By the time I texted back, a simple "I'll be there at noon," I had my answer. I wasn't going to beg for her love or attention. I wasn't going to apologize for having feelings or needs. I was going to state my boundaries clearly and accept whatever consequences followed. When I arrived at the house, her boyfriend's car was gone. A small mercy, but one I appreciated nonetheless. My mother was waiting in the kitchen, her face a careful mask of concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "I was worried sick." "No, you weren't," I replied calmly. "If you were worried, you would have called hospitals or friends. You would have left voicemails. You would have texted more than once." Her expression flickered, caught between maintaining the facade of maternal concern and acknowledging the truth of my words. She chose deflection. "Your behavior has been completely unacceptable," she said, folding her arms across her chest. "Running away like a child, ignoring my calls, embarrassing me in front of my boyfriend." "I'm not running away," I interrupted. "I'm removing myself from a situation that feels unsafe and disrespectful." "There's a difference." "Unsafe," she scoffed. "You're being ridiculous. He's a good man. If you'd give him a chance." "I don't know if he's a good man or not," I said. "What I do know is that you've put me in a position where I'm expected to immediately accept a stranger into my home, into my life, without any consideration for my comfort or boundaries. And when I express discomfort, you threaten to kick me out and cut contact with me." She had the grace to look momentarily ashamed, but quickly rallied. "You're exaggerating." "I never said—" "You said if I couldn't warm up to him, I could find somewhere else to live for the summer," I reminded her. "And that I shouldn't expect you to keep in touch once I'm gone. Those were your exact words. We stared at each other across the kitchen island, the space between us filled with years of unspoken resentments and accumulated hurts. I could see her calculating her next move, weighing whether to double down on her position or attempt reconciliation. I was upset, she finally offered, a partial concession. I didn't mean it literally. Yes, you did, I said softly. And it's not the first time you've chosen a relationship over our relationship. It's not the first time you've made me feel like I'm an inconvenience rather than your daughter. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. That's not fair. I've given you everything. You've given me material things, I acknowledged. And I'm grateful for that. But what I needed most was to feel like I mattered. Like my feelings were valid. Like I had a place in your life that couldn't be filled by whoever you were dating at the moment. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what came next. I'm not asking you to choose between me and him. I'm asking you to recognize that I have legitimate needs and boundaries, and that those don't make me selfish or inconsiderate. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice smaller now. I want reasonable notice before you invite someone to stay overnight, I said. I want proper introductions and time to get to know someone before they're proclaimed my future step-parent. I want acknowledgement that this is my home too, at least for the next few months, and that I have a right to feel comfortable here. She was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her words were careful, measured. And if I can't give you those things, the question hung between us, a final test of how far I was willing to go to protect myself. I thought of my father's words, of the plans I'd begun to make, of the sense of peace I'd felt sleeping in a space where I was welcomed, rather than tolerated. Then I'll stay elsewhere for the summer, I said. And we can try again when I'm home for breaks. But I won't live in fear of being thrown out at a moment's notice. I won't walk on eggshells in what's supposed to be my home. She didn't respond immediately, and I didn't push. Instead, I went to my room, began packing a larger bag with essentials I'd need for an extended stay away. My dog followed, watching curiously as I sorted through clothes and books and memories. An hour later, there was a soft knock at my door. My mother entered without waiting for a response, a habit that had always irritated me, but now seemed symbolic of our larger issues. He's not coming back this weekend, she said, her tone making it clear this was meant to be a significant concession. We're going to his place instead, I nodded, acknowledging the information without expressing the gratitude she clearly expected. Thank you for letting me know. Is that all you have to say? She asked, an edge of frustration creeping into her voice. What would you like me to say? I countered. That I'm grateful for basic courtesy? That I'm relieved to have my home to myself for a few days before the next surprise visitor arrives. You're still angry? She observed. I'm still hurt, I corrected. There's a difference. She sat on the edge of my bed, uninvited but not unwelcome. For a moment, she looked like the mother I remembered from before the divorce, uncertain, vulnerable, human. I don't want to lose you, she said finally. Then stop pushing me away, I replied. Stop making me feel like I'm competing for my place in your life. Stop treating me like an inconvenience when I express needs or boundaries. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Balance everything. Be everything to everyone. I'm not asking you to be everything, I said. I'm just asking you to be my mother. To consider my feelings as valid. To treat me with the same respect you'd give a roommate at minimum. She nodded slowly, not meeting my eyes. I can try, she offered, but it won't be perfect. And he is going to be part of my life. I'm not asking for perfect, I assured her, just effort. Just acknowledgement that my feelings matter, too. We sat in silence for a while, the air between us thick with unresolved issues and cautious hope. There was so much more to say, so many patterns to address, so much healing needed on both sides. But for now, this small step, this moment of mutual recognition, was enough. Happy Mother's Day, I said eventually, remembering the gifts that still sat untouched in the living room. I got you chocolates, and those singing balloons you pretend to hate but actually love. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Thank you, she said. For remembering. Always, I replied, meaning it despite everything. When she left my room, I continued packing. Not because I planned to leave immediately, but because I needed to know I could. I needed the security of options, the freedom of choice, the power that comes from knowing your own worth. The summer stretched ahead, uncertain and challenging. College waited beyond that, with its own set of struggles and discoveries. I had no illusions that one conversation had solved our fundamental problems or healed years of accumulated hurt. My mother's patterns were deeply ingrained, as were my own responses to them. But something had shifted, however slightly. I had drawn a line, stated my needs, asserted my worth, and in doing so, I had reclaimed a piece of myself that had been slowly eroding under the weight of others' expectations and demands. It wasn't closure. Life rarely offers such neat conclusions. It was something more valuable, a beginning, a chance to redefine our relationship on more equal terms, an opportunity to break cycles rather than perpetuate them. As I folded clothes and organized belongings, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. Whatever happened next, whether my mother honored this new understanding or fell back into familiar patterns, I knew I would be okay. I had found my voice, recognized my worth, and discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Sometimes I realize the most profound growth comes not from getting what you want, but from finally having the courage to ask for it. And sometimes the greatest act of self-love is simply saying, enough.